Hello, I'm Ramjee Chandran, and welcome to the History of Bangalore. This is the Ganga dynasty, part 3. The story of a man about whom we know very little, King Durvinita. Someone about whom we ought to know much. Now, if you just came in from the previous episode, that's great, welcome back. And if you've come in here directly, it's not a problem, it still works. But let me tell you, there's some great stuff in all the previous episodes, so whenever you can. Now, I have a great story for you today, so bust out the popcorn and lean in. The story so far. In the Ganga dynasty, part 1, we looked into the origins of the Western Gangas, their rise to power, which was around 350 AD, in the wake of a weakened Pallava dynasty. We met the founder of the Ganga dynasty, Madhava I, or Kunguni Varma, and heard of his superhuman feat of strength that got him the kingdom. Having established his capital in Kolar, Madhava I set up solid foundations for an empire that went on to last over 600 years. In part 2, we looked at the succession of the Ganga kings from Madhava I in 350 AD to the eve of the ascension of the 7th generation descendant Durvinita in about 550 AD. Some say it was later, some say earlier. Durvinita was a man as adept at wielding the weapon as he was with the written word, a master of prose, poetry, and war. The long reign of Durvinita was a pivotal one for the Gangas. It marked the end of their independence as a kingdom as they became feudatories of the Vatapi or Badami Chalukyas for the rest of their existence. Let's dive into all that, but first, give me leave to thank the Prestige Group for their generous corporate support. They make the History of Bangalore possible. Building cities, one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. And now for the story. When the time came for Avanita, the 6th Ganga king, to declare the succession of the kingdom, Avanita chose his second son and not Durvinita, who would be the first choice by the norms of succession. Understandably, Durvinita was upset by the decision, but he took the crown back from his brother by force. Now, this was not without consequence, and it sparked off a lot of unrest and unhappiness everywhere. For one thing, the Gangas lost the Pallavas as allies, and they became foes. The Pallavas, who had been very friendly and supportive of the Gangas, and indeed had conducted the coronation of 2 of the Ganga kings, decided that they would side with their brother, Avanita's first choice, and not Durvinita. And this, in hindsight, may not have been the wisest decision for them. The ensuing enmity saw battles between Durvinita and the Pallavas, and between Durvinita and his brother. By all accounts, there were several of these battles, but the most important aspect in my quite literally book is the change in course of the history of the Ganga dynasty, because it was during the time of Durvinita that they became a feudatory of the rising Vatapi Chalukyas and lost their independence to them. But to understand what Durvinita did in his reign, it is necessary to understand Durvinita the man. He was easily the most interesting of the Ganga line of kings, before or after. It is said that when he burst into the scene, he brought with him the force of life in all its exuberance. In the last episode, I described him as someone who was a Renaissance man, even if it was 1,000 years before the Renaissance in Europe. Durvinita was adept in domains as literature, science, math, philosophy. He was a Sanskrit scholar, and he was a Kannada poet. And he played host and patron to a number of literary figures. And not just that, they say that he was great at taming wild elephants. And in keeping with his nature, he was inclusive and secular, uncompromisingly so. He received people of all faiths without bias. Under his watch, all religions and all faiths flowered, as did all cultural and intellectual matters. And the socio-political landscape underwent significant changes, traditional orthodoxy giving way to a more liberal and cosmopolitan ethic. And of course, doesn't take much to understand the positive effect this must have had on how cultural expression was able to flourish. What do you expect from a man who could tame an elephant by day and compose literary passages by evening? Durvinita's reign was long. Inscriptions progressively made references to many years of his reign, and one of them said it was recorded in the 40th year of his reign, which means he ruled for longer, maybe 45 years, maybe 50. But this long reign did not start easily. To set the stage, by the time that Durvinita had come into the line of succession, the Gangas had already exercised their hold over large areas of the Mysore Deccan. The region that they controlled was all around Bangalore as we know it today. By 430 AD, they had consolidated their eastern territories, comprising modern Bangalore, Kolar and Tumkur district, and by 470, they had gained control over the Kongu region, which is near Coimbatore, Sendraka, which is modern Chikmagalur and Belur, up in the northwest, and then around the northwest of the region and also around modern Nanjangud. And I say that his reign did not start easily because normally Durvinita would have inherited the throne from his father Avanita. For one thing, Durvinita had the right to the throne by the norms of succession. He was the son of the eldest queen. The most interesting theory of how we come to know this was described in a book I'd read on studies in Indology, published in 1941. By that book, her name in the inscriptions is mentioned as Jayeshta. Now, according to the scholars who authored that book, Jayeshta is not a great name. It means goddess of misery, the bestower of sorrow and property, one who delights in the strife of others. Not a nice person at all, and therefore no reasonable parents would go and name their child Jayeshta. So there's little chance that that was her given name. But scholars say that as a common noun, not a proper noun, the word also means eldest or senior-most wife, and this is most likely the case. But Avanita decided to hand the kingdom to the son of a junior wife. Some say that it was on the advice of his guru Vijayakirti, whose name we encountered in the last episode. Or maybe Avanita was more smitten with the other wife and agreed to make her son the king. Whatever it was, it appears that Durvinita's brother actually took the throne and ruled for a few years after Avanita's death. The inscriptions that mention this story do not mention the brother's name or even the father's name on the inscription, except that we know that to be Avanita by other references. I don't know if this is widely known, but I found a pattern to whatever Durvinita-related inscriptions that I read. No other names but his are mentioned on them. One charitable explanation is that Durvinita provided so much excitement for the scribes that he was all the news that they could handle. Durvinita never really saw himself as being out of the succession race, and he set out to correct the travesty. And correct it he did. The most poetic description of Durvinita's return to power is described in the famous Nallala copperplate inscriptions, which reads, "The goddess of sovereignty caused to reside forever with happiness on his broad breast, after having with his powerful arms dragged her by the hair, though she had been firmly held within the fold of the arms of his own stepbrother." And how he dragged the goddess of fortune back to his broad breast away from the arms of his stepbrother was to wage war. It is at this point of the history of the Gangas that things started to change for the dynasty. I'm not going to venture what year it happened because there's little agreement among scholars and published sources on when exactly Durvinita ruled, and the estimates vary by over a century, each theory quoting a different inscription for evidence. I did spend a great deal of time on it, but I'm not getting into it now. The variables and possibilities are way too many. In the continuing saga and on the balance of things, all evidence seems to point to the Pallavas having taken sides with Durvinita and supporting the coronation of the stepbrother. The stepbrother got the support of the Pallavas, led by Kaduvetti, and also the Rashtrakutas, who would remain a continuing problem, a thorn in the side for the Gangas for over a century. The reference to these dynasties are seen in the Nalala inscriptions, which speaks of Durvinita being surrounded by hostile kings. On his part, Durvinita too needed help, so he turned to the Chalukyas, and they were ready to assist because this alliance sat well with their larger designs of consolidation of their empire. As part of their plans was the subjugation of the Kadambas in the northeast at Banavasi. They had turned the Kadambas into feudatories and therefore could use them to be well protected on the northeast front. In the south, they were in constant tussle with the Pallavas, and this, as we will see moving forward, is the story of endless bloodshed. Therefore, assisting Durvinita to the throne of the Gangas suited them perfectly. And not very long into the time of Durvinita, the Gangas would become feudatories, but happy feudatories of the Chalukyas. So in they went together into battle against the stepbrother. Throwing himself and his allies into war, Durvinita fought victorious battles at Andheri, Alattur, Purulare, and Parnagara. Of these places, Alattur is near Coimbatore, Purulare in Chengalpet, and Parnagara is Salem. Interestingly, about the location of the Battle of Purulare, there is a high likelihood that Purulare is the same as Polilur or Pudalur, and as any history buff would know, this is the location of 3 other historic battles. The Battle of Pudalur, fought between the Chalukya king Pulakesin II and the Pallava king Mahendravarman I in 612, and the 2 battles of Polilur in 1780 and 1781 of the Second Anglo-Mysore War between Hyder Ali and the East India Company. This is where Hyder and Tipu won. Once again, the inscriptions are wonderfully poetic about Durvinita's achievement, and I quote, "Having the 3 powers of increase, who had brought anxiety to the face of Yama on account of the smallness of the residue left after the countless animals offered to him as a tribute, namely the brave men consumed in the sacrifice at the face of the many wars waged." Bringing anxiety to the face of Yama, as most people would know, means satisfying the god of death. But the phrase, "the 3 powers of increase," threw me, but eventually I came upon its possible meaning. In the Dharmic view, the phrase, "the 3 powers of increase," reflect the qualities of a virtuous king. These include the Purusharthas, or goals of a meaningful life, Dharma, which is righteous duty and moral conduct, Artha, ensuring material property and economic security, and Kama, which is earning the respect and loyalty of his subjects. A king who excels in these areas is considered to possess these 3 powers of increase, and therefore his ability to lead his kingdom to prosperity and all-round fulfillment. And with the circle of hostile kings subjugated, the stepbrother neutralized, Durvinita secured his inheritance by hereditary right and began a long and eventful reign as the king of the Gangas. When I come back, more about this man, about the battles, and about his literary and softer side, right after this.
Prestige Group brings to you its latest launch, Prestige Somerville, lake-facing 3 and 4-bed apartments on Marathahalli, Whitefield Road. For more details, call 85489 85489. Project is RERA approved.
It took very little for Durvinita to consolidate his kingdom. Important events secured his destiny, and the first was the addition of Punnad, or Punatti, which is located to the northwest, just north of Dharwad. Now you might remember Durvinita's mother, Jayeshta, about whom we spoke before the break. When she married Durvinita's father, Avanita, she was the daughter of Skandavarman, the king of Punnad. Although she was intended by her father to be married to another man, there was a Swayamvara held. This is an honored tradition where the girl, the princess, gets to pick her husband from an assembly of princes who show up as suitors. And there, Jayeshta, or whatever her name was, picked Avanita of the Gangas. When Skandavarman died, his only child being his daughter, the entire kingdom passed on through her to Durvinita by inheritance. Now Punnad or Punnati, which by Benjamin Lewis Rice is also the same as Punnata, was a valuable addition to the Ganga kingdom. For one thing, it was a major Jain center, and I might remind you that the Gangas were basically Jains, many of them choosing the faith and choosing to live as Jains. And Punnata was the place to which Bhadrabahu, the Jain sage, migrated. He, by the way, was the spiritual guru of Chandragupta Maurya. I had also stumbled upon mention of Punnata in both Ptolemy's work, Geography, and Pliny the Elder's History, and both of whom speak of the famous Punnata being on important trade routes, and importantly, about the renowned Punnata emeralds. The capital of Punnata was Kirtipura, or present-day Kittur, which most people will immediately recognize as famous in latter-day history on account of Rani Chennamma and her general Sangoli Rayanna, who relentlessly fought the East India Company forces in a David and Goliath matchup. Well, that was the same Punnata that peacefully passed into Durvinita's hands through his mother, clearly not the goddess of misfortune and misery. The second event of significance in Durvinita's reign was when he was stuck in a place where he had to contend with the Pallavas from the east, but also the Vatapi Chalukyas, whose power was growing to an alarming degree. And as any wise ruler would know, this is the sort of emerging situation that needs to be handled with diplomacy and not by war. Peace with the Chalukyas not being an option, Durvinita decided to hand his daughter in marriage to the Chalukya king, some say it was Vijayaditya or Pulakesin II, and turning his new in-laws into lifelong allies, ones who would respect boundaries and allow him to operate independently in practice, even if he was a feudatory in theory. And this is recorded as one of Durvinita's most intelligent and far-sighted decisions. And that came to be proved with the third event that I want to mention, and that was years later when he helped put his grandson, born to this daughter, on the throne of the Chalukyas. There's a rather entertaining inscription about it, of course, and this one reads, "Having captured the Kaduvetti of Kanchi, who is celebrated as Ravana in the earth, on the field of battle, and having established his own daughter's son in the hereditary kingdom of Jaisamma Vallabha, Durvinita became famous in the world." Now that's an obscure way of putting it. Here's the simpler way to say the same thing. Durvinita defeated the Pallava Kaduvetti, who was as evil as Ravana, and then he put his grandson on the throne of the Chalukyas. While I will go over the Chalukya end of things in more detail in upcoming episodes, this inscription describes what happened after Pulakesin II fell to the Pallava Narasimhavarman in the Battle of Vatapi in 642 AD. Narasimhavarman, taking revenge on Pulakesin, who had repeatedly tried and unsuccessfully tried to attack Pallava territory, attacked Vatapi, killed Pulakesin, and took control. After Pulakesin died, though, there was a lot of confusion. For one thing, it didn't seem that Narasimhavarman's heart was in it. He didn't want to stay in Vatapi. History tells us that he had bigger fish to fry. He left Vatapi soon after the invasion in 642. So what did happen in the succeeding years? Who did he leave behind to rule and with what mandate? And what were the Pulakesin family doing? Were they still in the palace? Well, all that's hazy. But smelling an opportunity, across the Chalukya kingdoms, feudatories were trying to declare independence. Among them two of Pulakesin's sons, who were governors of provinces. But one of Pulakesin's sons, probably sensing the half-hearted Pallava presence, spotted a larger opportunity and decided to regain and reunite his father's kingdom. So he waged a campaign against the Pallavas, got them to leave Vatapi by the year 654, and ascended the throne in 655. And this was Durvinita's grandson, Vikramaditya I, who is well known in history. Although the Gangas had progressively slipped into a feudatory position in their relationship with the Chalukyas, it probably served them well in their constant defense against the Pallavas. And as I said, more about this when I get to the Chalukyas, but this act of helping his grandson gain the throne of Vatapi, or Badami as we know it today, would have been a sweet victory for a proud grandfather. The mark of Durvinita, the man for all his might, was that he was one of the most inclusive and respectful monarchs in history and one of the most talented persons of literature in the realm. He was open-minded and followed the highest traditions of hospitality. He was generous to Jains and Brahmins and all other communities who all spoke highly of his liberal side, his welcoming demeanor, and his refined cultural sensibilities. The time of Durvinita was a period when religion was inextricable from the politics of the day, and predictably, there has been much bloodshed on religious grounds, intra-religious battles counting as the most of them. But in an environment with an air of religious openness, even curiosity, expression of art and opinion and culture flourished, and this was one of the happiest times for Kannada literature. Much has been said about Durvinita's literary accomplishments. He excelled, it is said, in composing diverse forms of poetry and storytelling and drama. And literary peer groups operate in small, tight clubs where the criterion for admission is often just a show of ability. And Durvinita has been cited by people of literature more than once. For example, the Avanti Sundari Kathasara is a literary work by Dandin, a prominent Sanskrit poet and prose writer. He makes reference to Durvinita in his introductory chapter. In that, he references the famous poet Bharavi, who stayed in the court of Durvinita for many years. For that association, it appears that Durvinita may have composed a commentary on the 15th sarga or canton of Bharavi's Sanskrit poem, Kirachuniya. This particular poem is renowned for its rich use of alliteration and other forms of verbal embellishment and wordplay, and for that reason has also come into criticism by some people who thought that Durvinita had composed that 15th canton. And underlying his literary skills, Durvinita was a scholar who wrote in Sanskrit and Prakrit dialects and also in Kannada. Now, we might remember that the Gangas were staunch supporters of the Jains, and in the land, we see some of the best Kannada literary minds emerge from the Jain community, Pampa and Ranna being neither the first nor the least of them. But centuries before Pampa and Ranna, the earliest available work on poetics in the Kannada language is Amogavarsha Nrupatunga's Kaviraj Marga, a work that provides great insights into the literary conventions and linguistic features of early Kannada literature. And that all-important piece of literature acknowledges the subject of today's podcast, Durvinita, as one of the most respected Kannada writers. Viewed from yet another flattering angle was Durvinita, the animal expert, said to be a rival to renowned experts like Rajaputra and Salihotra in the sciences of training horses and elephants for war. And this completes the cycle, taking us back to Durvinita's ability as a warrior. And as Malini Ariga quotes in her book, an inscription that portrays Durvinita as, I quote, one whose feet were colored by the tiara of kings kneeling before him in fear. Coming up is more about this dynasty that ruled the Bangalore region for centuries with the Ganga dynasty part 4, the golden age of Sri Purusha, and the nasty and bloody relationship with the Rashtrakutas, and the somewhat anticlimactic ending. I'd love to see you again for that one. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the History of Bangalore.